'cause I love you. Yes, I love you.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Renee Barnett, your host. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. We have a wonderful show planned. I want to get right into it. We have best-selling author Tim Wallace Murphy. My goodness, he's a prolific author. He's written lots of books: Hidden Wisdom, Rex Deus. Tim, help me out here. I think I have a list, but I dropped it on the floor right next to me.
Oh, there's only about 14 of them. I wouldn't
That's
worry.
right. Yes, absolutely. Anyway, Tim, it's so wonderful to be talking to you again, even though it is only via Skype. Hoping to see you in September when I'm back in France, as you are. And I want to thank you so much for getting up at this hour. It's 4:30 a.m. on Friday, I know, for you, and I truly appreciate it. And I apologize for the ungodly hour. But anyhow, Tim, I was thinking about tonight's show, and of course, I want you to talk about whatever you want to talk about. But I just started thinking, where am I going to begin with this? And I started thinking, well, maybe at the beginning, not everyone is as knowledgeable about the Knights Templar as you are. Certainly not very many people. I'm certainly not. And I know a lot of people are just now getting sort of in tune with that history. And I was wondering, when we talk about the origins of the Knights Templar, we think of the idea that they were set up to protect pilgrims on the route to Jerusalem. But it seems like there might be some discrepancy about, maybe they were at least loosely organized before that. And do you believe that that was the real reason? Or can you kind of give us a little information about how they got started?
Yeah, well, I will do insofar as it's known. First of all, the normal date that's given for the start of the Knights Templar is 1118 or 1119. But in actual fact, there are documentary references to them dating back as early as 1095. There was a family conspiracy going on. This didn't arise on the spur of the moment. It had been long planned, and there were a group of families in power in Europe called Rex Deus. Now, they claimed descent from the high priesthood of the Temple of Jerusalem. And because of their marriage patterns, only marrying within a very small restricted group, they're actually traceable in the archives of Europe. And they were appointed to positions of power, insofar as we can establish, very early on by the first Holy Roman Emperor, a man called Charlemagne, who was the first leading person in Europe who claimed descent from the house of David, the same sort of lineage claimed by Jesus. And bear in mind that when he was ruling his vast and rather unwieldy empire, that there was no postal service, there was no telephone service, there was no internet, so he needed people he could trust. So he appointed members of this family group to positions of power, particularly in regions that were vulnerable, as was the Languedoc, where I live in the southwest. And he used these people and a large Jewish community down here as a sort of buffer state to stop the infiltration of Islamic influence coming from Spain. Other members of the families were in positions of power in an area called Champagne, which is much further north. It's up near Paris, to the east of Paris. And it was from that region that the founding members of the Knights Templar arose. Now, the original 8 or 9 founding members were all related. They all came from the county of Champagne, and they all owed allegiance to Count Hugh of Champagne, who later became a member of the order. And yes, they fought for the Christian state in the Holy Land, but their objective was somewhat different. They honestly believed that they were fighting to regain their old holdings in the Holy Land. And they were an incredibly brave and courageous order. But their real claim to fame comes not from their fighting abilities, but from their Europe-wide organization. They owned lands and properties from as far north as Poland down to the islands of Majorca in the south, from Portugal in the west, right across Europe to the Holy Land in the east. And all the profit that was made from these properties was used to maintain the Templar army in the Holy Land. It was the first standing army in Europe since the fall of the Roman Empire. And to maintain it, they created a commercial network which was a precursor to multinational conglomerates today. They were a truly remarkable group of people.
Now, when we talk about the Knights Templar, how do they relate, to the Crusades and then subsequently the Inquisition? Had there already been a split by that time, by the time of the Inquisition, between the Templars and the Church, or?
Don't think in terms of split. The Templars looked as though they were operating within the Church, and for the vast majority of its members, that would have been true. But the inner ruling core, which were always drawn from the same families, had their own agenda and had a totally different belief system. They did not believe that Jesus came to redeem us from sin as some sort of vicarious human sacrifice at Golgotha. They believed that he came to reveal a pathway of spirituality, which ultimately would unite everybody on the planet with one belief system, a system of universal brotherhood founded on the principles of truth and justice. So in that sense, they were indeed heretical. They did not subscribe to the mainstream Christian belief.
So you hear that same term, this uniting the world, uniting mankind through spirituality under the same belief. You hear that today when we hear about secret societies and their possible raison d'etre. And it seems like, is this part of what we hear called the underground stream of knowledge that's being passed down by these families that you were talking about, this close circle of people who intermarried and then, started multiplying from there? Is that part of what the Templars were about?
Oh, yes, very much so. They had to do it in secret because if the church authorities discovered it, they would have been repressed brutally, which of course ultimately is what happened. Don't forget, the Inquisition did not exist at the time the Templars were founded. The Inquisition came about 150 years later, and it was founded to suppress the Cathars in the southwest of France. And after the Cathar Crusade, the Inquisition grew in strength and power and was in fact used to torture the Templars for nearly 7 years after the arrests on Friday the 13th of October, 1307. But the Templars as an order were never actually convicted of any crime. Individual members were tortured to death. The Grand Master and his second-in-command, Geoffroy de Charnay, were burnt alive for renouncing their confessions, but the order was never actually convicted. And it was disbanded by the Pope on the grounds that it had fallen into disrepute. Now, the link between the belief system of the Knights Templar and certain other members of the hidden streams of spirituality and later Freemasonry is an indirect link. The Templars were suppressed in 1314. Freemasonry didn't appear until the late 1500s, early 1600s. And the linkage was between the founding families. The same group of families who founded the Templars later founded Freemasonry. So this is where the linkage comes. And the linkage is very, very strong. There is a very, very easily discernible Knights Templar tradition within Freemasonry, particularly in the United States.
So these families that set up these two linked up organizations, you know, at different stages of time, is there something particular? I know you've done a lot of work in research and writing about these families. Is there something that you find particularly unusual or unique about these families, other than the fact that they're just keeping everything kind of close to the family, close to the chest, and that's why they intermarry? Is there any other reason? Is there something special about these people? I know that you've spent a lot of time with Prince Michael of Albany, and you know, is there something that is unusual about these people? Do they have some sort of special qualities?
Yes, there is. Forget for the moment individuals like Michael. The families believed that they were handing down the true teachings of Jesus. And while outwardly they would appear to be practicing the prevailing religion of the time and place they lived in, for example, in Europe, they would outwardly practice Christianity. If they were in the Middle East, there's a good chance they'd be practicing Islam, and some of them were. At home, they would pass on the secret teachings from father to child and down through the ages. And it's this process of teaching that becomes the link. If you look at the Knights Templar and you look at modern day Freemasonry, you will find that the name Jesus is very rarely mentioned. The two Saints John are the people who get the veneration. St. John the Baptist, who of course they believe was the teacher of Jesus, and Jesus' star pupil, St. John the Divine. It's the process of transmission of the teaching that is being celebrated here. Now, when I wrote Rex Deus, which was published back in 2000, seems an awfully long time ago now.
Oh my gosh, it does.
Sure, a few weeks afterwards, I got a letter on very impressive headed notepaper with a coat of arms on the top. And the letter was very brief, and it worried me. It said, "Dear author, you should have consulted me before you rushed so precipitately into print. We must talk, and better yet, meet." So I rang this gentleman up, explained who I was, and explained that we'd been given an incomplete story, and we tried to fill in the gaps, as we'd mentioned in the book, from our knowledge of medieval history. And then I posed the question. I said, "Where did we get it wrong?" And I got a very surprising answer. He said, "Oh, you didn't, dear boy. It's just incomplete. Do you want the rest?" Well, you bet your ass I wanted the rest. So we arranged to meet, and he invited myself and my then collaborator, Marilyn Hopkins, to his home for a weekend and said, "Please arrive on Friday before dusk." Now, at that point, the warning bells in my head started to go off, because my mother was Jewish, and dusk on a Friday is the beginning of Shabbat.
Sure.
So we duly arrived at the appointed time. And as we were walking through the dining room to take our bags up to the bedrooms, we noticed the table was laid for dinner. And on the mantel shelf, there was a menorah, there was showbread ready at the table, and there was a yarmulke by each of the gentlemen's plates.
So it was a Seder dinner.
Yeah, and the prayers were said in Hebrew and in Aramaic. They were practicing the same tradition
Wow.
that they had been taught for over 2,000 years. And that's what it's all about. It's passing down spiritual teaching. It was not about earthly power and prestige. It was about teaching the principles of brotherhood and unity.
Well, I recall you saying a few moments ago that, some of the Templars were practicing Christians and some were practicing Muslims, but yet they were also believe.
There were no practicing Muslims in the Templars. There were practicing Muslims amongst the Rex Deus families who lived in the Middle East.
Oh, thank you for that correction. I see. But yet the belief system that was being handed down that they were all practicing sort of transcended those belief systems. Is that right?
Oh yes, very much so. That was the central core.
And it's most of what we know about the Knights Templar, at least sort of commensurate with the times. Is that from William of Tyre, and then later from Inquisition records, which of course can be sort of read backwards to try to figure out what they really said, I guess.
Well, I personally do not put much stress on William of Tyre. First of all, he was writing some 70 years after the events he purports to describe, and he was no great fan of the Templars. There are much earlier and much better references in the records, Ivo of Chartres amongst others, and they are much more important, and they're usually ignored by modern historians for some peculiar reason. There's an unfortunate trend amongst historians of the medieval era that they tend to copy the errors that their predecessors have written into the record, or they focus on the wrong aspects of things. You have to look at the full picture, and going back to original documentary records as far as possible, not the work of your own predecessors.
Yes, well, I guess so. I guess one would really need to go back to, at least in a translation, one hand down. Everything's been translated down and diluted so much that we don't really know what we're getting, especially those of us who just read and speak English.
Well, let's give a little bit of guidance here to anybody who's doing their own research, which I hope people are.
Please.
First of all, there is no such thing as an unbiased document anywhere in the world. Everything that is written down, particularly in the medieval times and earlier, was written down for a purpose, and that purpose was to give somebody an advantage, to give them an edge. So there's always bias. That you've got to allow for. And secondly, if you want to get to grips with these things, you don't rely on translations. You have to learn the language concerned, which is usually Latin. If you're relying on translation, there is a bigger margin for error. So one has to learn the languages of the time. And most of church records and most official records up to about the 13th or 14th century are Latin. Some are in Norman French and early French, and you have to learn those as well. There's a lot more to this. If you're just relying on translation, you're relying on second, third, or fourth-hand information. It's not good enough.
Gosh, I can't imagine myself at my age sitting down to learn Latin at this stage of the game, but I might rely on more scholarly people like yourself.
Well, I'm not a scholar. I'm just an elderly pilgrim along the path of love.
Yes. Well, now you've moved yourself from the east coast of France, or the eastern part of France, over to the southwestern side in the Languedoc. And I see on your Facebook page it says Esperanza.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah. And
It's a
so
lovely town.
now you've been there, what, about a year Of course, I
I've,
mean, I know you've gone there many, many times because I've been there.
I've been working down here on and off something like 35 years,
Yes.
but they were intermittent visits. I've been living down here now for about 15, 16 months. My wife and I, my wife Cindy and myself, came down here within a couple of weeks of getting married, well, a few days of getting married. And we've been here ever since. And it's a wonderful place. Uh, the long,
Why did you move there?
well,
Was
the
it
Languedoc has been a cultural crossroads since the beginning of time. We've had them all through here: the Phoenicians, the Greeks, the Romans, the Muslims, the Visigoths, the Cathars. This was the epicenter of the Knights Templar and the Knights Hospitaller. And it's still a cultural crossroads. And it was the border between Christian Europe and Muslim Spain. And Spain is where it all happened. That's where the foundations of European culture were laid, not through Christian scholarship, but through Muslim scholarship. At a time when Charlemagne couldn't sign his name, there was a university in Cordoba which drew its intake from Christian, Muslim, and Jewish schools throughout Spain. Islam was a most tolerant regime, far more so than Christianity, and that's where the scholarship was. In Cordoba, they published 20-odd thousand books a year. They had the second biggest library in the world, and it was the cultural hub of the western part of the Empire of Islam. And nothing was happening in Europe. Christianity was based on the assumption that everybody was best kept ignorant and fearful. Yeah. Whereas in Islam, they didn't waste time on theology. They said the study of God is a waste of time, it's insanity, zana. If you wanted to know about God, you had to study his works in nature. So they studied science, they studied astronomy, they studied medicine. Europe's first medical school, which was founded not very far from here in Montpellier, was founded in the 13th century by Jewish doctors who trained in Muslim Spain and North Africa. All our science, modern science, is based on Muslim scholarship. And yet we treat these people so appallingly badly.
Well, yes, everybody paints everyone with the same brush, unfortunately. And that, again, is a matter of ignorance. And I know that you've done much work in this area, much research into Islam and into that whole culture. And in fact, have written a book called What Islam Has Done for Us. Is that correct?
That's correct, yeah.
Yeah. And I know that, probably people are wondering, what the heck are you writing a book about Islam for at a time when everyone's so up in arms about everything?
Well, that's why I had to write it. Because
absolutely, I agree.
Records straight.
I agree, and I think it's a great book, and everybody ought to take a look and educate yourselves, and then form your opinions based on education.
My background, my mother's people were Jewish, so
yes,
technically I'm a Jew.
That's right, because your mother.
I'm quite proud of that, and rightly so. But the Jewish people would not have survived if it was not for the tolerance of Islam. From the time of the Prophet Muhammad until the early 1900s, 85% of the Jewish people in the world lived under the tolerant rule of Islam, and they did so through choice, because they were far better treated there than they were in Christian Europe. And people forget this, and the obscenity of what's happening in Israel at the moment makes me feel sick. But that's a personal view, and that's political, but it's nonetheless true. I can't stand racism.
No, I don't like it either.
Whether it's based on color, creed, or anything else. We're all children of the same God, and it's, to quote Martin Luther King, we have learned to fly in the air like birds. We have yet to learn to walk on the earth like brothers. And it's about time we bloody did.
Well, I agree with that 100%. But so you now you find yourself in the Languedoc, and there's a lot of people. You said it's a crossroads. It's a pathway. For all these different groups, all these different philosophies, all these different thoughts. And why is that? Why that area? Because it's absolutely true. But why?
Why? For simple geographical reasons. It was because of the mountainous barriers between France and Spain. It was easier to travel along the coastal roads. Because of, again, brigandage and robber barons along the route on land, it was easier to travel by sea. So everything happened along here. The Phoenicians, who really founded European trade as we begin to know it, and the ancient Egyptians, the Romans, they all used the sea as a means of transport. It was easier than traveling over land. So the coastal areas become important. And the area here, first of all, it's stunningly beautiful. It's a series of mountains and hills. Each valley is different. Each town and village has its own traditions. And the people have developed a culture here which is very warm and very welcoming. And I love the place. I would not willingly live anywhere else.
I love it too. I mean, I keep going back again and again and again. And I'll be there in September again. And I'm really excited to get back. It's a draw. It calls me back every time.
Well, the wonderful thing is here, it doesn't matter why people start coming. They get hooked.
Yes.
I don't know whether it's just the earth energy, whether it's the culture, whether it's spirituality, or a mixture of all of them. But people tend to stay. If they've been here at all for very long, I call it the glue pot. I say if you stay more than a fortnight, you're going to end up living here.
Yeah. Well, we had, people that have come on our tours and stayed, or come back, moved there. It's amazing. And I warn everyone before they come that if you, if you go, I'm warning you, you will return, you will go back. And with that, it's time for us to take a break, Tim. We're talking with Tim Wallace-Murphy about the Knights Templar, about the Languedoc Rennes Chateau mystery, and the Holy Grail. So stay tuned. We'll be right back.
Hello, everyone. Lorian Fenton here, host of the California MUFON radio show, asking if you'd like special access to exclusive and amazing information about UFOs, the paranormal, and all things unexplained. If you're nodding yes, then join IRN's Insider Club. As an Insider Club member, you'll get an all-access pass to premier Inception Radio Network content for only $4.99 a month. This includes live UFO and paranormal conferences, live streaming UFO skywatches, exclusive IRN radio and TV productions, and of course, paying radio with MJ and Ken Storch. So don't wait any longer. Visit InceptionRadioNetwork.com and click on Member Login to join IRN's Insider Club and get your VIP access today.
Are you a fan of Inception Radio Network? Do you reckon it's the best alternative talk radio station on the planet? Well, if you do, head to facebook.com/Inception Radio Network and like the page. Tell your friends, spread the word, and keep listening to the best. Do you have a smartphone? If so, Inception Radio Network is the best app for you. Available on iTunes, Android, Samsung, and most other app stores. Just search Inception Radio Network. With the app you can listen live, check out podcasts of recent and past shows, view our videos, see what shows are coming up, who the guests are, and, via the chat room, send live questions to those guests. You know it makes sense. Check your app store now. Inception Radio Network. I'll see you there.
Hey, IRN listeners, make sure you tune in to Night Vision Radio with Renee Barnett. Renee will be exposing the truth, one secret at a time. When? Thursdays. Every Thursday, 10:30 p.m. Eastern, 7:30 p.m. Pacific. Where? Right here on IRN.
Hello, IRN listeners. This is MJ saying hello and sharing an awesome secret I discovered. It's called DreamNuage.com. Fresh, raw, organic ingredients are used to create all their products. They are made in very small batches to ensure quality and freshness. Handmade in the USA, each product is created with care and with the finest organic ingredients. There are no preservatives, dyes, or chemicals in any product. Stop by Dream Nuage and relax. That's DreamNuage.com. Simple, raw, organic.
You're locked into Inception Radio Network, Superior, Wisconsin.
Here we go. We are back with Night Vision Radio. I'm your host, Renee Barnett. We're talking with author Tim Willis-Murphy. We've been talking about the Knights Templar, got into a little bit about the Languedoc region, which featured so prominently with the Templars. And I know we're going to be sliding right on into the Holy Grail. But before we go there, Tim, I wanted to ask you something about the environ of Rennes-le-Château. I believe there were, was it 5 Templar preceptories on the hilltops surrounding that area? And if I'm correct about that, why would there have been such a huge presence? Do you feel that they were guarding something?
Yes, they were, but not in the sense that most people assume, which is the sense of buried treasure. People always think about loot. No, they were guarding the border with Muslim Spain. And it's not just the Knights Templar who were around here. The Knights Hospitaller were here too, another warrior order. And so the Cistercians, the apostles of the frontier, you will always find where you find Knights Templar establishments within 2 or 3 hours ride, there would be a Cistercian one as well. Because in the early days, the two orders were almost indistinguishable. One was the order of prayer and the other was a warrior order. And they were regarded as two arms of the same body. But the Rennes-le-Château thing, that's one of the reasons a lot of people come here in the first place. And I can still remember the excitement I felt when I watched television back in 1971, and I saw this wonderful man, tiny little diminutive bearded figure called Henry Lincoln, telling us the story about this priest, Berenger Saunière, who came out of poverty in a tiny little hilltop village and suddenly started spending millions. And it was fascinating. And we had to wait 5 years for another program. And then there was an even more interesting one. And then 3 years later, a third. And then, of course, came the explosive book. It was a bestseller at the time, and still is, called The Holy Blood and the Holy Grail. And it was written by Henry Lincoln, Michael Bagent, and a rather strange man called Richard Lee. But the story it told was fascinating. Most of it was hokum, as we later found out, but not all. And the two things it did for me anyway, and for a lot of other people, was make us all realize that there was far more in history than we had been led to believe in school. There were undercurrents and stories that were fascinating. And secondly, that The book is probably its most important purpose was to introduce the idea to the English-speaking world that Jesus had been married and had children. Now, there was a lady theologian in America who is now a very good friend of mine who read this, and she was horrified, and she thought it was blasphemous. So she prayed over it, and she received instruction to do the research and write up what she found. Her name is Margaret Starbird.
Yes.
And to her intense credit, the integrity of that woman shines through. She wrote what she discovered, and she wrote a wonderful book called The Lady with the Alabaster Jar, which confirmed the fact that Jesus had married Mary Magdalene and they had descendants. If that was the only result that came out of Henry's book, it would be worth it. But Henry's book and his television work has triggered people coming down here literally in their tens of thousands every year, and many of them come for the wrong reasons, perhaps just out of curiosity or out of treasure seeking, but they stay and they come back time and time again for spiritual reasons. And spirituality transforms people's lives. It's totally different from religion. In religion, you're accepting a body of belief and a load of hokum that somebody else has foisted on you. In spirituality, you experience your own transformation and you start to get in contact with the divine in a way that is almost indescribable. And that's the reality of the Holy Grail.
Yeah. Well, you know that I'm a big fan of and a great friend of Henry Lincoln, and I was one of those people that read that book back in 1982, Holy Blood, Holy Grail, as we called it here in America, when it was published here. And I was one of those people that was kind of freaked out by it. But I was intrigued and I was excited by it. But I was thinking, I was raised in southeastern Oklahoma, as a Southern Baptist. And I'm thinking, oh my God, I'm going straight to hell for thinking about this. And it was hilarious. But I read it. I struggled through it. It's a hard read. You got to admit, the book is a penitential read. But it is full of great stuff. And you're right. Henry is the first one to say now, oh, it's baloney. But there is some really choice stuff. I use it still for reference. But also, I think you're right. It did sort of start a big conversation. And
it did. And let's face it, the amount of people who are involved in spirituality today who owe their introduction to it to Henry Lincoln, it's almost beyond count.
Oh my gosh, can you imagine over the years how that number's increased?
And there's nobody writing in this area, including myself, who is not traveling on the coattails of Henry Lincoln. He's a lovable old boat. Well, he's younger than me, actually, by a few months.
Not very much, yeah, I was going to say.
But he has accomplished a hell of a lot and is totally modest about it. And if you tackle him about the inaccuracies of the book, he will say with charming honesty, we floated a few hypotheses and some of them didn't work out, which is honest.
Yeah.
And that's part of the charm of the man.
Yeah, Henry's nothing if not honest.
Yeah.
Sometimes painfully so.
Well, you've got to be, because there's so many people, when it comes to spiritual and religious themes, so many people have been peddling bullshit for 2,000 years that somebody's got to stand up and try and reach for truth. And that's what most of us are trying to do. And there's a big difference between spirituality and religion. And you mentioned being a Southern Baptist. There was a friend of mine who was a Southern Baptist who had a problem with that. And he went to his teacher and he said, I don't want to be one of these religious freaks who takes the Bible down on Sunday and screws everybody over from Monday to Saturday. And yet you tell me I've got to follow a spiritual path. And his teacher said, well, there's a difference between spirituality and religion. And the man understandably said, well, tell me what it is. And the teacher very wisely said, no, you need to consult somebody outside the order, somebody who's totally independent. Do you know somebody? And the teacher said, yes, his name's Father Ed Dowling. Sounds like some goddamn Catholic. Well, he is, he's a Jesuit. You want me to talk to a Jesuit? No, but you want your question answered. He's the man. So Chuck, to his intense surprise, found himself in front of this hulking great Irish priest and said, Father, what's the difference between spirituality and religion? And this is the answer he got. Well, son, to explain that now, I've got to tell you a little story. Spirituality is symbolized by the fresh spring water of a spring which arises naturally at the top of the mountain. It represents God's love for all of creation. And under the wonderful invention of gravity, it trickles down the mountainside and sustains and strengthens and refreshes everything it touches. Now, religion, that's something else again. That's the well-intentioned man-made plumbing, which will usually make the water go uphill where it shouldn't go, and will as often as not whistle it past your arse without the benefit of a tap. Being man-made, it always pollutes the water. So if you have any doubts, go back to the spring. And of course, this is what people are doing now, more and more.
Yes.
People are disillusioned with the consumer society. They realize how empty and how cruel it is. They're alienated from mainstream religion because that seems to be preaching hatred rather than love. And they're flocking to one form or another of spiritual path. And it doesn't matter which one, because they're all basically the same. They vary a little in the phraseology depending on the culture, but they all try and encourage you to learn a little bit about humility, to develop the capacity for love and compassion, and then above all, service to other people. So does it matter if it's the Kabbalah, the Sufi tradition, the 12-step recovery program, the Eightfold Path of Buddhism? No. What matters is that you follow it, that you become a pilgrim. And there was a wonderful professor in America called Joseph Campbell, who's sadly now dead. And he did a television program with a very perceptive journalist who's still around, thank God, Bill Moyers.
Yes.
And Moyers posed the question to Campbell. He said, what's the Holy Grail? And Campbell responded with another question. He said, well, why should any medieval knight set out for a search for a relic, however holy, when, according to the belief system at the time, if he wanted a miracle, all he had to do was go to communion and he would partake directly of the body and blood of Jesus? He said, no. He said, the search for the Grail is not a search for a relic. It's a coded guide to a search for enlightenment. And then he quoted a passage from the Gospel of Thomas, where Jesus is reported to have said, he who drinks from my mouth, I shall become he, and he shall become me. And that, according to Campbell, is the whole point of the Grail.
And the Gospel of Thomas, which of course is part of the so-called Gnostic Gospels or the Nag Hammadi Library, I understand that according to biblical scholars, I don't know but it was a big group of biblical scholars decided, what of all the texts, including all the Gospels, the canonical Gospels, all the Gospels, is most likely what Jesus said or would have said or really said. And they were unanimously agreed that it was the Gospel of Thomas was the most authentic record of what they felt Jesus really said.
Well, that's not surprising because Thomas was Jesus's twin.
Didymus Thomas.
Yes.
Thomas.
Yeah, and that's what Didymus means.
Yes.
And the church tried to devalue him by calling him Doubting Thomas. Sometimes when I hear the term gospel truth, I want to vomit. Because it's the biggest set of distortions ever foisted on man. The miracle is that if you read the Gospels carefully, you start to discern the loving brotherly message that Jesus preached. And it's all about love, it's all about compassion, and it's all about service to others. And when I read the thoughts of so-called fundamentalist Christians in your country who are preaching hatred of gays or hatred of other religions, I think, Jesus Christ, they've got the wrong end of the bloody stick. They're in the wrong forest.
Yeah.
Jesus is all about serving the poor, looking after the sick. Go therefore to a place that has been reserved for you before all time. For you fed me when I was hungry, you visited me when I was in prison. And when do we do this for you, my Lord? Whenever you did this for the least of my people, you did it for me. They've lost it. And it's sad, incredibly sad. If we're not here to love one another, what are we here for? To accumulate goods? To say, I've got more money than you have? Or my car is bigger than yours? We all fit in the same size grave when it's finished.
That's right. Try losing someone you love and you find out what's really important in life.
Yeah. That's it.
You snap to it immediately.
When I look back over my life, which has been a very privileged one, really. I mean, I'm 85 years of age. I don't remember the successes, either when I was a political animal or when I was starting as a writer. I don't remember the failures. I remember people. Other people and what it's all about. I remember the friendships, the laughter, the kindness that I've been shown, and the essential goodness of most people. And this is what we should be focusing on. The fact that somebody is a different color or a different religion or a different sexuality doesn't matter a tutney damn. We're all children of the one God.
Well said. Well, I'm wondering, I'm getting a lot of questions from our listeners in the chat room, but I think I'm going to hold those to the last half hour, if that's okay. And then
that's
if
fine.
you don't mind, we'll spend some time then. You can just field some questions and they're kind of all over the board. So we'll just go with those during the last half hour. I just wanted to let everyone know I'm not ignoring you. I'm seeing your questions. And when I start to post questions or pose questions to Tim, if you don't mind, repost your questions at that time, just so that I don't miss them. If I'm not asking your question, repost it.
Yeah,
Anyhow,
answering
now
people's questions is more important than anything else.
that's right. Now I was going to ask you that question. What is the Holy Grail? And I had a sense that you were going to say what Joseph Campbell's answer was, and it's true. I believe that now, although, I had so many questions for so many years. Was it a cup that held the blood of Jesus? Was it Mary Magdalene, the womb that held the child of Jesus? Was it all these things, or could it be all these things and more?
Well, it's rather like the old Latin tag, tot homines quod sententia. There are as many opinions as there are people. And in the initial instance, it doesn't matter, because once you start searching for it, even if your perceptions are off beam, you will be drawn into the right way.
And you say these ideas and ideals and these philosophies and beliefs are passed down among these special families. Now, are they all practicing these, or are they like every other family? And some people just
Some do, some don't. They're humans. They're like mixtures. Some people have lost touch with their family traditions. Others, they're very real. And I don't know about anybody else, but there are some days I follow the path rigorously, and there are others I forget it.
And are these families, are they the bloodline of Jesus and Mary Magdalene?
Amongst them, there are people of that particular group. But to quote one of them at a conference I organized some years ago, they said, "What's it like to be a descendant, to know you're a descendant of Jesus?" And the man looked at the assembled audience and said, "After this amount of time, 85% of you could probably say you have some of his blood running in your veins."
That's
Does
right.
it matter? What matters is how do you behave?
Yes, and all these people running around taking these DNA tests to prove that they're related to this line or that line. And I wondered, does it really matter? And
And
like you
I
say,
feel rather sorry for people who spend an awful lot of time and sometimes money proving their descent from this line or the other, because there's always some fraudster who's prepared to give you so-called proof for a fee. And ultimately, it doesn't matter a bloody damn. It really doesn't. I can trace my father's family back for 800 years. So what? I can trace my mother's family back for 1,000 odd years or a couple of thousand years. So what? It's how do I behave to the people I deal with? That's what counts. Am I kind to the people I meet on the street? Do I keep my word? That's what counts, not what bloody ancestors I've had. Some of those were villains.
yeah, it wasn't that sort of, the idea behind the Templars, to give aid and comfort to others.
It was. Wherever you find a valid spiritual path being practiced, you will always find primarily the principle of service. Now, where the Templars were established throughout Europe, the local communities rose in prosperity. They rose in privilege. And as a result, for example, of guarding the pilgrimage routes, overland trade became feasible without robber barons, without tolls. And so the accumulation of capital started. The balance of power started to shift from the hereditary nobility to the newly emerging merchant classes. Everything started to change. And it's about action. It's not about what you preach. It's about how do you live. Don't tell me, show me.
That's the only thing that really makes sense. It boils down very simply. And I don't.
Take a look around the world today and have a look at it as it really is. And the district you live in, not just the wider picture. And you tell me whether we need brotherhood based on truth and justice, whether we need respect for the environment and for the other inhabitants of this earth. Of course we bloody well do, because mankind is becoming an endangered species. The greenhouse effect is not a theory to be argued about or refuted by Southern politicians. It's a fact. And, if we don't change our ways, we ain't going to be here much longer. It's as simple as that.
Anyone that's living in the South, I don't see how they can deny what's going on around them with all these, climate changes, weather changes, severe weather conditions. It's changed so much over the last.
I regret to say that the worldwide situation, it's not just the deep south of America. People face far too much reliance on politicians and priests. I remember there was a wonderful author in England called Quentin Crisp, and he was asked at a public show one day how to make the world better. And he looked with a look of pity at the audience and he said, "Oh, so you want the world to be better, do you, dear boy? Well, it's no use waiting for the priests and the politicians to make it better for you. They've been around for thousands of years, and look at the mess we're in. If you want the world to be better, you have to go out there and learn how to be better." And that's the whole point of spirituality.
That's a pretty good point. And we're just about at time to take another break. So we will be back in the next half hour. We are going to be taking questions from our listeners. If you're listening and you're not in the chat room, join us at inceptionradionetwork.com and pose your questions or comments to Tim Wallace Murphy, and we will be right back.
Hello, everyone. Lorian Fenton here, host of the California MUFON radio show, asking if you'd like special access to exclusive and amazing information about UFOs, the paranormal, and all things unexplained. If you're nodding yes, then join IRN's Insider Club. As an Insider Club member, you'll get an all-access pass to premier Inception Radio Network content for only $4.99 a month. This includes live UFO and paranormal conferences, live streaming UFO skywatches, exclusive IRN radio and TV productions, and of course, paying radio with MJ and Ken Storch. So don't wait any longer. Visit InceptionRadioNetwork.com and click on Member Login to join IRN's Insider Club and get your VIP access today.
Are you a fan of Inception Radio Network? Do you reckon it's the best alternative talk radio station on the planet? Well, if you do, head to facebook.com/Inception Radio Network and like the page. Tell your friends, spread the word, and keep listening to the best. Do you have a smartphone? If so, Inception Radio Network is the best app for you. Available on iTunes, Android, Samsung, and most other app stores. Just search Inception Radio Network. With the app you can listen live, check out podcasts of recent and past shows, view our videos, see what shows are coming up, who the guests are, and, via the chat room, send live questions to those guests. You know it makes sense. Check your app store now. Inception Radio Network. I'll see you there.
Hey, IRN listeners, make sure you tune in to Night Vision Radio with Renee Barnett. Renee will be exposing the truth one secret at a time. When? Thursdays. Every Thursday, 10:30 p.m. Eastern, 7:30 p.m. Pacific. Where? Right here on IRN.
Hello, IRN listeners. This is MJ saying hello and sharing an awesome secret I discovered. It's called DreamNuage.com. Fresh, raw, organic ingredients are used to create all their products. They are made in very small batches to ensure quality and freshness. Handmade in the USA, each product is created with care and with the finest organic ingredients. There are no preservatives, dyes, or chemicals in any product. Stop by Dream Nuage and relax. That's DreamNuage.com. Simple, raw, organic.
You're locked into Inception Radio Network, Superior, Wisconsin.
We're back. You're listening to Night Vision Radio. I'm Renee Barnett, your host. We are talking tonight with author Tim Wallace Murphy. We've been getting into the Knights Templar, into the Languedoc region of southwest France, and into the Holy Grail a bit. And now we're going to address some questions from our listeners that are coming across through the chat room. First one is from Neutron. He says, were the families involved in the Templars and then the Freemasons Kabbalists?
It depends on your definition of Kabbalah. The Kabbalah or tradition is based on oral traditions that go back to the time of the Exodus. They took written form in this part of the world, oddly enough, here in Spain and in northern Italy during the 11th and 12th century. And there may well be an overlap here between the formal Kabbalah as it took form in the Sefer Zohar and in the family traditions, because the families were descended from the 24 Mamadot, the hereditary high priesthood. So there will inevitably be a degree of overlap. But to what degree that is, I'll be blunt, I don't know. But it's certainly, you're looking at shared Hebraic spirituality. But there were several spiritual pathways at the time prior to the fall of Jerusalem. So we're guessing and fumbling our way here to a certain extent. But there will be a lot of common threads there.
Thank you. And Court asks, does Tim see any relationships between the different mysteries of Rennes-le-Chateau and Santiago de Compostela, and is Rosslyn also involved with the same philosophy?
Have you got a week and I'll tell you. The mystery of Rennes-le-Chateau, frankly, most of it is hokum. The only mystery is, where did Saunier get his money from? And the answer to that is nobody bloody knows. It's been speculation and it will continue. And I hope that that mystery is never actually solved, because I want people to keep coming down here. It's got absolutely nothing whatsoever to do with Santiago of Compostela. Santiago of Compostela has a dual purpose. First of all, it's one of the oldest Christian pilgrimage sites in Europe. And secondly, it ties into the Knights Templar and Freemasonic tradition, because after the suppression of the Knights Templar in 1314 and prior to the rise of Freemasonry, it was one of the staging posts on what was known as the Alchemist's Pilgrimage, or the Pilgrimage of Initiation. And people started off by preparing in a town called Sintra in Portugal, and they would be initiated into the first degree of initiation in the crypt of Santiago of Compostela. At a later stage, they would get the second degree at a church called Notre Dame de la Dalbade in Toulouse, and later on, the third degree in Orléans, the fourth in Chartres, the fifth in Notre Dame de Paris, the sixth at Amiens, and ultimately the seventh degree, the King of the Grail, at Rosslyn. But that pilgrimage only lasted for about 200 years, and it was done very quietly, and it was done in reverse order from the normal pilgrimage to Santiago of Compostela. I wrote a book about that called Rosslyn, Guardian of the Secrets of the Holy Grail, which I am told is still well worth reading.
Oh, I'm sure it is. Now, someone has a question, and it was a while back, so forgive me for not giving your name. I don't remember who posed the question, but they asked if there could possibly be an extraterrestrial connection to all these things. For instance, Jesus ascending into heaven, Muhammad, flying from Medina to Mecca, or vice versa, whichever one it was. I'm sorry, I don't remember.
Well, my alarm bells go off when I hear any one of the two A words. One is aliens from outer space, and the other is Atlantis. Now, of the two possibilities, aliens is more plausible, and there is no proof yet of any contact with anybody from other planets. That doesn't mean to say it's not possible, or that it isn't true. It's just that we have no proof. And I can only talk about things which I can see, touch, and feel and prove. So I'm afraid you'll have to include me out on that one.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you. What another question from Neutron. What was the relationship between the Templars, Freemasons, the Templars and Freemasons with the Rosicrucians?
First of all, they all followed spiritual paths. And according to one modern Sufi writer, spirituality is a river that descended to earth through Adam, may God grant him peace. It was refreshed by the great prophets such as Abraham, Moses, Elisha, and Jesus, may God grant them peace. By the great prophet Muhammad, may his name be blessed, may God grant him peace. It is a river that knows no boundaries in space or culture or time. And yet, each race, each creed, each culture claims it for its own. My brethren, it is always the same river. That's the key thing. It is always the same river. The Knights Templar were founded by Rex Deus families. The Templars were suppressed in 1314, and that was the end of them. And anybody who tells you that they continued is talking nonsense. There is no direct continuity between the medieval Knights Templar and any modern organization. The teaching continued within the families and was transmitted to a very large extent into Freemasonry. Within Freemasonry, people are taught by ritual and allegory, and they're taught to listen so they can listen to learn. And once they start learning, they develop, thank God, an insatiable curiosity about spiritual values. And as a part of that, many of them end up studying Rosicrucianism and other paths, Kabbalah, for example. They're all interlinked, and they all reinforce each other. Fundamentally, there's no real difference.
And at the risk of being incendiary, Sky asked, does Mr. Murphy think there will ever be peace in the Middle East?
Ultimately, I'm an optimist. It won't happen in my lifetime, that's for sure. But I am 85. It may happen in his, I don't know. But there has to be peace. We are not put on this earth to destroy each other. And ultimately, in the Middle East, the main nexus of problem is Israel, of course, and the Palestinians. There is room for both people on that land, and they will ultimately have to learn to live in brotherhood. But as long as they are preaching hatred, and as a Jew, I hate to say this, but most of the hatred is being preached by the Israelis, and it's based on racialism. As long as that goes on, it's going to take a hell of a long time to solve. One of the obscene things about that situation is the fact that Israel claims to be a democratic state, but if you try and judge it by the same standards as any other democratic state, you're accused of being anti-Semitic. And then they finally play the Holocaust card. Now, I think that the most obscene insult to the memory of the millions of people who were so brutally exterminated during the World War is to use their suffering as an excuse to impose the same sort of suffering on other people. That is an obscenity. Ultimately, there must be peace. I think it will take about 30 years, and it will only come about when there is one unified country wherein all citizens have the same rights and obligations, be they Arab, be they Jewish.
So you don't believe that the separate Palestinian state is the answer?
I would love to, but I'm afraid the actions of successive Israeli governments have made that virtually impossible.
Well, now let's just move on to another question. Court says, are you aware of the bloodline coming to America? Well, I would imagine it seeped over here, but do you think that there was a purposeful migration of these families?
No, it happened. There are legitimate people from the bloodline in America. But I'll be quite blunt. I think the bloodline has lost its importance. I think that with the foundation of the worldwide craft of Freemasonry, it had achieved its effective aim. And if I was looking for a force, a vibrant force for good in this world, I would look at the various aspects of Freemasonry, which is a worldwide brotherhood, which preaches tolerance of all the religions and practices spiritual principles. Therein lies the hope. It's a powerful good. But I don't think hereditary principles have any relative importance today at all.
I think, I know Court, and he's a researcher into these areas, and I think he was asking, in terms of some of his research of these families that have connections to these other families that have done things like built certain structures in America that line up with other things, and so he's finding that in some of these sites, all the same family names just keep coming up over and over again who had something to do with the construction of these. In fact, Court is actually going to be on my show next week. It's Court Lindell, and he's going to be on with the with actress Lara Limberti, who's also a researcher. And Lara has discovered what she and Court feel are a twin to the Great Cross at Onday that's about 15 minutes away from that same location. And so we're going to be talking about that next week. But that's why he's asking, not necessarily for, this special bloodline people, but he's tracing back these families and trying to find out why there's a lot of octagonal towers, things like that, are put in these locations by these same families over and over again.
Well, that's not surprising. Today, the hereditary principle doesn't matter much, but over the centuries, there are undoubtedly groups of families, most of them are connected loosely or directly to the Rex Deus families, who have left us physical reminders, architectural triggers to make us think and to focus us onto spiritual themes. That it does not surprise me, and that is a worldwide phenomenon, because it's not just out of the Judaic-Christian culture that this sort of thing happens. It happens in other cultures too.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I had one more question from Court, and it's kind of backtracking a little bit. How important is the legend and imagery of Sainte Marie de la Mer? How does this all figure into your theories, if at all?
Sainte Marie de la Mer, I tend to look at as a separate issue. It's vaguely interlinked. First of all, the Sainte Marie de la Mer tradition did not seem to arise until about the 9th or 10th century. Then it took hold in a very, very big way. In fact, the road up to Saint-Baume, the grotto at Saint-Baume, is known as the Chemin des Rois, the pathway of the kings, because the kings of France used to make a pilgrimage there. But the tradition of the Mary's landing at Sainte Marie de la Mer, which is celebrated twice a year by the European Gypsy community, is one of the most colorful and intriguing places on God's earth. The whole place comes alive with different cultures. And anybody who's been there and has experienced the fervor and the devotion of the Gypsy people, particularly the ladies, will be impressed by it. But you can't trace the tradition back that far. That's the puzzling thing. How did this arise? What does the tradition mean to the Gypsy people? They're not telling us. They keep very, very quiet about that. I have close friends amongst them, and they just will not talk. It's their deal, and they're keeping it to themselves. Is it true or not? Is it based on truth or not? I would like to think it is, but I'm not sure.
Yeah.
And I remember asking a priest at St. Baum, I said, have you any actual proof that the Magdalene was ever here? And he said, no, sir, we haven't. But I can tell you something, she's here now. And there is a tangible presence there. But does that come from truth of physically being there, or is it just a reflection of the 1,000 years of veneration? I don't know. I remember Margaret Starburg claimed a few years ago that she'd found a tapestry dated to the 3rd century, which tended to confirm the story at Sainte Marie de la Mer. And she sent me illustrations.
Was that the Jeremy Pines tapestry?
I honestly don't know, but she sent me illustrations of it and her explanation of those, the symbolism, and I'm sorry, I could not see it at all. It was wishful thinking. I don't know is the short answer. I'm fascinated.
And then, of course, if you don't know, then you don't know whether that is really her skull that they have, and they encase it in the gold reliquary and parade it around the town.
Be awfully careful about relics, my love.
Yes. Oh, absolutely.
Jesus Christ, to float the bloody Titanic. There are enough pieces of the true cross to reforest the cedars of Lebanon.
Yeah.
There was an industry manufacturing them. There are at least 2 claimants to have the head of John the Baptist. And there are foreskins of Jesus scattered all over Europe.
Oh, my goodness.
I mean, let's get real. Relics were a money-making racket for the church. Yes. Chartres Cathedral burnt down in the late 1100s, and they thought they'd lost the Virgin's tunic that she was wearing when she gave birth to Jesus. And then 3 days after the fire, 2 monks were seen covered in soot coming out of a part of the crypt, bearing the reliquary. Oh, my God. I mean, yeah. Let's talk about something real, shall we?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks so much for indulging us and answering our questions. Everyone is so jazzed up about your appearance here, getting all kinds of compliments in the chat room. They love listening to you, as I do, and it's always been that way. You're just such a wonderful speaker. Now, let's see. Where's another? Oh, I had one last question from Neutron asking which of the 2 groups, the Freemasons or the Templars, did the Jesuits involve themselves with?
Very hard to know. The Jesuits, to a certain degree, modeled themselves on the Templar tradition. There is no discernible link between the Jesuits and either the Knights Templar or the later Freemasons. However, having said that, when the Inquisition went to Malta to try and root out Freemasonry, the Knights of Malta chased them away at some speed because the Knights of Malta were very heavily involved with Freemasonry. And who is to say that certain leading Jesuits may not have been? It was theoretically a capital offense in the Vatican States to be a Freemason. You could be executed merely for membership. So the whole thing is confused. Just because something is forbidden doesn't mean to say it doesn't happen. But proof, that's a different ballgame.
Indeed. Indeed. Now, before we run out of time, we've only got about 6 minutes left, it looks like. I want to make sure that everyone knows how they can get your books. I want to make sure they know that your name is Tim Wallace, WALLACE Murphy, and he does have a lot of interesting books out there. One of my favorites I know is Hidden Wisdom. I don't know if that's one of your favorites, Tim, or not, but
It was fun. It was a fun one to write because that sort of encapsulates a little bit of all the different traditions in one book, and it gives you an overview.
Some of your books are a little bit hard to come by.
You can get them off Amazon.
Can you? Rex Deus and
Rex Deus is out of print in English. You can get it in French, you can get it in Italian, and I think you can still get it in Spanish. But the English publisher went bankrupt some years ago, and because three of us were involved in it, we could never reach full agreement about republication, which is rather sad. But it is available secondhand by various sellers using the Amazon site.
Yeah, I would definitely recommend that one.
It was superseded by a later book called Custodians of Truth.
Yes. And if someone was starting out in this whole area, I know a lot of our listeners are seekers of truth and researchers themselves, but if you're just someone who's just starting out on this path, what would you suggest the first book of yours that they should read?
I would suggest either Custodians of Truth or Hidden Wisdom, but it's not important that they necessarily read my work or any other particular individuals. What is important is that they develop discernment, a bullshit detector, because don't think that all modern books are necessarily true or well-intentioned. Some are just written for loot.
Yep.
Learn to resonate with your inner being. Your soul will vibrate in a different way when it discerns truth. And truth is an elusive commodity. It changes over time. There's no such thing as an absolute independent truth. It's always subjective. And what you feel to be true today, which will lead you in the right direction, in 10 years' time you may reject it. It's done its purpose. It's got you going. The trick is to be curious, to question. When you read something, say, who benefits from this? What's it all about? Why was it described in this way and not in that? Question everything. Never believe a word I write or anybody else does. Double check it. Go back to the sources. If the writer is trying to be honest, they will footnote their statements and tell you where the stuff comes from. Go back and double check. Seek for yourself. Don't take anybody's word for anything. Just use it as a starting point, as a trigger. I'm not there to educate anybody or to inform them. I'm certainly not there to convert them from one flawed belief system to another. My job is to make you buggers think. Not accept blindly a church dogma or a political dogma, but make your own mind up. Go for it.
Well, we appreciate it, Tim. Thank you so much. Thanks for all your work. And I do recommend that you read Tim's books because I have. And they're not only enlightening and educational, but entertaining. It's all such great information. I mean, I love this material. But you do such a good job. And I love when you come on the show or when we have a chance to talk or see each other in France and you speak to our groups, and everyone always comes away with something of benefit. So we really appreciate that.
Well, and just keep going.
Yes, just keep on keeping on, and that's what we'll try to do. And I guess, it's like you said something earlier about, all these different beliefs. It really doesn't matter, as long as you're doing it. And I remember Henry Lincoln always said years and years ago, one door is all that's needed. And when he said it, I didn't really know what that meant, but I think I've figured it out now.
Doesn't matter what your starting point is, the destination is always the same.
That's right. And with that, the music is rolling. and we're all out of time, but I want to thank you once again, especially for getting up and doing the show at 4:30 a.m. I appreciate it. Love to Cindy, and we'll hopefully see you soon.
Yeah, I look
And
forward
everyone, join us next week. We have Court Lindell and Lara Lamberti. We're going to be talking about the Great Cross at On Day and its twin. Thanks, everybody, and good night.